there it goes. They hired me in 2016, and they weren't planning on starting the program until 2017. The only two faculty members at that time were Sarah and I. Sarah Kine, except her name was something else at the time. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it was Sarah and I, and we decided to start it right away that semester. It's a big surprise, huge surprise. And everybody was real happy about it. We had lots of students. We didn't think we'd have very many students, actually. We thought the 20s, maybe the 30s, and we started out with close to 100 the first year. So we were real surprised. So we hired other people along the way. Sarah is no longer with us. We pretty much just had me and Jeremiah. And Jeremiah's brand new. I mean, so new that he's only been here a couple of weeks. So we are the psychology department right now. There for a while we had 4 psychology instructors, and now we only have the 2 of us. The internet didn't start till 1993. That's something that you need to understand. Of course, if you were born after 1993, what difference does it make? It's been there all the time for you, but I was born in 1949. So when I went to school, you had to write everything down. If you wanted to find out a piece of information, there was no internet since it didn't start till 1993. So you had to look it up in a book. You had to go to the library and look it up in a book, or get an encyclopedia and look it up. I only use about 2 or 3 fingers. I think I use this finger and my little finger to hit the A. The A's right here, then the S, and then the D. Anyway, that's the extent of my typing. When I was in high school, I didn't take typing. I took Latin instead, and of course, maybe I should have taken typing. If I had known what was going on, I probably would have. I was born here, right here in Muncie, Indiana. I was the second boy out of 4 boys in my family. My father was in World War II. My mother was a registered nurse. She worked, and that was something that women didn't do back in the 50s, but she did. She worked and raised 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, and that's my family. And this is where I'm from. There's Chicago up here, Columbus, Ohio is over there, Cincinnati. And if you don't know that part of the country, it really doesn't make any difference. I'm from Muncie, so if anybody asks you, is she still looking for they're running students down. That's too much fun. Okay. I don't know why my clicker's not working. Well, maybe it is working. I don't know, my clicker's done something. Anyway, okay. Indiana's just another of the states on the other side of the Mississippi River. Mississippi River runs right through there. I actually live on the Mississippi River now. I live in Clinton, not Clinton, Iowa, but Lost Nation, Iowa. So I live right here where there's this curve is in the Mississippi River. It's directly across, it's directly west of Chicago, strangely enough, all the way across Illinois, of course, but it's just another state over there. You guys probably don't care. Scott's from here, San Diego. Okay, are you from here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's here, we're right there. And of course, that's Indiana, so we're way, way far away. Once upon a time, of course, most of the indigenous peoples lived over here. And the reason they lived over here was because lots of game. It's green, they could grow lots and lots of things. So most of the indigenous people used to live way over here. Even the Sioux came from this area right in here. And then they, as the encroachment from Europe, of course, it moved everybody over, and the Sioux moved into the Buffalo Plains, along with lots of other tribes, of course. Anyway, that's where I'm from. I'm from Indiana. People from Indiana are called Hoosiers, as weird as that sounds. I can't. Huh?
It's a good movie.
Hoosiers? Yeah, it's a great movie. It's about basketball. And my clipper's not working. I don't know what's going on here. Put this over here. See if it works over here. Anyway, yeah, it's a good movie. You're right. I had my DNA check once upon a time. You guys don't need to have your DNA check because you know what's in there. But of course, people who come from Europe, they come from a lot of different places, and Europeans aren't specific as to who they marry and who they reproduce with. So what I discovered was I come from 3 different places: England, Western Europe, which is primarily France and Germany, and Ireland. Not very much Irish, lots of English, lots of Western European, French and German especially. My people were Walloons. Walloons were French-speaking people that lived in the Low Countries. Not important. The Dutch. There are 2 groups of Dutch people and Belgian people, the Walloons and the Flemish. The Flemish speak Dutch and the Walloons speak French. And they fight each other all the time. And of course, they're the whitest places you can possibly imagine, so I'm probably the whitest guy you'll ever meet. I don't know why my ancestry, why the people in my family didn't, experiment with anybody else. But it turns out that I married a woman, of course, who was primarily English and German and French. Her name was Bonnewitt, which is a French name. Anyway, I don't know what's wrong with us. Anyway, we're the whitest people you ever meet. But don't worry, I'm not a white supremacist. Most of my ancestors, the ones that we claim, of course, and of course everybody has good people and bad people in their family, they came to the Americas 300 to 400 years ago, which is a long time as far as I'm concerned, but as far as you guys are concerned, you guys can trace your ancestry back thousands of years. We landed in Massachusetts and New Jersey. I actually have ancestors that were on the Mayflower. Most of my people were Quakers. Especially the ones that landed in New Jersey. We came to Indiana, or we went to Indiana about 250 years ago. So they went across the mountains as soon as they could. And they settled in Indiana mainly because it's good farmland, and they were farmers. So they were living there with the indigenous people until they kicked all the indigenous people out. I have relatives who were captured and who were adopted into different tribes. I had my DNA checked, so evidently I don't have any of that DNA, or not enough to show up on my DNA. I am the first Bradway to live west of the Mississippi River. The first one. So if you want, you can blame me for a lot of different things, but I really didn't have anything to do with what happened to you guys. I don't have anything at all to do with the long walk. Most of those guys that were the American soldiers were from New Mexico and Missouri, as strange as that may seem. I just read about this over the summer. I read a book called Blood and Thunder and Navajo Wars. Fascinating. I'm not sure you're getting the full picture. I'm not sure Wilson's giving you all the, he gives you the traditional stuff, but I'm not sure he's telling you the history, because it seems like it's not quite as clean as he says. But Wilson's a buddy of mine, so he hit me the other day, punched me in the back. Why would somebody do that? Not once, but twice. I have presidents in my ancestry. If you go back in time, I have two presidents. One of them was John Adams, and the other was John Quincy Adams. Their Indian policies were questionable. They didn't preach eradication, of course, but they were fairly humane. Of course, they were from Massachusetts. Both of these guys are from Massachusetts. I was reading something the other day. It said John Quincy Adams had the highest, of all the presidents, had the highest IQ. I don't know what that means, but But you can see it cooked off most of his hair, all that thinking. Anyway, they're pretty nice guys. Not really. They both served just one term. John Adams was the second president of the United States, and he lost his presidency to Thomas Jefferson. John Quincy Adams had to ally himself with the slaveholding states in order to be elected president. He was one of the only Whig presidents we ever had, but he had to sell his soul to the devil, as he said later on. He became very anti-slave after his presidency. He went back into Congress, and every day he wanted to debate slavery, and they wouldn't let him do it. You couldn't even use the word slavery in Congress. If you did, then they would censure you, and you couldn't speak for the rest of the day. And he would stand up at the beginning of the day and say, "Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I'd like to discuss slavery." And of course, at that point, the Southern representatives would stand up and start yelling at him. Anyway, when I was growing up, I thought Indiana was the only place in the world. Probably, if you lived in San Diego, you thought San Diego was the best place, most wonderful place there ever was. When you were 5 years old.
Italy probably was Cosenza.
Yeah, but you've been there
Yeah.
when you were 5 years old, or 7 years old, or 12 years old, and you probably think the reservation's the greatest place in the whole wide world, don't you? Had you ever been anyplace else? Did you ever visit Denver?
Oh, yes. Yes, I've traveled.
You've traveled, but when you were a child,
You
you probably thought this was the best place in the whole wide world, and all the people around you were the nicest people that ever lived. So did I. I lived in Indiana, and I thought it was the only place in the whole wide world. And then I went to college, and when I went to college, I met people from all over the place. And I realized that Indiana wasn't the only place in the whole wide world. And I ran track, and I interacted with people from all over the United States. It was kind of fascinating. I grew up around African Americans, but I never even thought of them as different until I was told that they were different. And then I realized, no, they're not. I always thought they were the same. So that was a real eye-opening experience for me, that other people had different ideas about about my friends. I didn't think that made a lot of sense. So when I went away to college, I was in a dormitory with African Americans, and because the college was primarily a fraternity college, and all the fraternities were segregated, all the black people lived with me in the dormitory. So that was kind of interesting. We formed a group. I'm saying we as if I'm the only guy, but there were a number of us who were in the dormitory. So it was really kind of an interesting experience. It was almost a rebellious experience because it was something completely alien to everything that I had known up to that point. And I realized there was a lot of inequality out there. Of course, I was aware of what was going on politically. The civil rights movement had started before that, a long time before that. And then I joined the military. And in the military is kind of interesting because you have, your only identity is is the fact how many stripes you have. That's your only identity. They could care less whether you're Hispanic or African American or Caucasian or Native. They don't really care as long as you can carry a gun and shoot it at the right people and at the right time. The first time I ever lived someplace else was when I went off to basic training in San Antonio, and then I went for training in Wichita Falls, Texas. I was married at the time. Got married in my sophomore year of college, the end of my sophomore year of college. So I had 2 kids by that time and a wife, a crazy wife. In the Air Force, I was trained in medicine, and I became a medical laboratory technician. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Second part of my training occurred in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is really close to Muncie, as you can see. It's only about 70 or 80 miles away from Muncie. So I was able to go home from time to time. worst thing in the world for my wife because she got homesick. The closer she was to home, the more homesick she became. And so she started thinking of herself as a high school kid. And she wanted to go home. Well, I was in the military, I couldn't go home. They don't do that. They don't let you go home. And this was during Vietnam. They really weren't letting people go home during Vietnam. I mean, it's not like you could go, well, I don't think I want to be in the active duty military anymore. I think I want to join the National Guard. That didn't work because the National Guard was full. People were dodging the draft. They were dodging Vietnam by going into the National Guard. So I couldn't do any, I mean, I had no choice. And that's okay. I had a good time anyway. And I lost my wife. Which was also a good thing, because she's a crazy lady. Like I said, my first wife was happy with Dayton. We had 2 kids, and it was only an hour away from home. But the Air Force, of course, rarely leaves you where you want to be, or where you think you need to be. And they assigned me to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. It's up on the Llano Estacado. It's where the Comanches came from, or where the Comanches lived. They lived up on the Llano Estacado. They lived all over this area right here. Comancheria, as they used to call it. Anyway, I served I was TDY to Vietnam, which was always fun, but that was from Lubbock, Texas. So primarily I was in Lubbock, Texas. At the time, if you got killed in war, the insurance was $35,000, which is not bad money. So when I went off, my wife started spending the $35,000. She knew I was going to die. I didn't. I didn't die, okay? I came back, which was much to her chagrin, I came back. My wife was miserable in Lubbock, Texas. If you've ever been there, you know why. If you've ever been to Lubbock, not the nicest place in the world. Texas Tech is there. So she decided to run off with somebody. She ran off with a guy. There's my 2 kids. They're not really, those aren't really my 2 kids. She was pretty unhappy and she was pretty miserable, so she ran off with another guy. The good thing was that she left me with the kids. I couldn't figure out how to get rid of her and keep the kids. I was afraid she was going to take the kids. Well, you know, most women, especially in the 70s, they take their children with them when they leave. But she was in it for a good time, so she didn't do that. She just left the kids. And we were all 3 pretty happy about it. I was stationed in Lubbock for 7 years. As god-awful as that sounds. While I was there, I married my second wife. My second wife was a military marriage. My third wife actually was in the military. That's my wife right there. My current wife. My second marriage only lasted for 5 months. I found a woman that actually could tolerate me and like my kids, and we've been married for 40 years, actually. That should be 40 years. That's my wife dressed up for Halloween as a rodeo clown. That's her. The problem was that I was enlisted and she was an officer. That's not acceptable behavior. One of us had to get out of the service, so I got out of the service. And she stayed in. When I married her, she was a first lieutenant. When I met her, she was a second lieutenant. But when I married her, she was a first lieutenant. She retired as a 06, as a bird colonel in 2001. After 24 years of service, that's for her. As a clown. Now I put that together, that whole outfit together. The reality is I'm the clown and she's not really much of a clown. There she is. Okay. Okay, that finally took me to, out of Lubbock, we were stationed, I was stationed at Ramstein, she was stationed at Zweibrücken in West Germany. It was split, of course, at that time. And this was in 1979. In 1980, the Russians invaded Afghanistan. The world was on the edge of a war. The Russians were massing tanks on the East German border. Looked pretty bad for a while. And of course, we were right there. We were like 150 miles from the East German border. She was in Zweibrücken, so she was farther west than I was. I was at Ramstein, but Ramstein was headquarters. We were stationed in Germany for 3 years. In those 3 years, my wife got to go home, my kids got to go home every summer, but I never got to go home, mainly because I was playing softball. I know. Terrorists at the time were communists. They weren't Muslim terrorists. Iran fell to the radical Islamists and the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Ramstein was attacked by communist terrorists, and this is what it looks like. This is Youth Safety Headquarters. This is the parking lot outside of Youth Safety Headquarters. I was the first medic on the scene. I happened to drive by right after the explosion went off, and I knew that something was wrong. You can look at I knew something was wrong. So I went in and there were a couple people that were injured. There weren't that many people in the building, actually. There were only 3 people in the building. One guy wasn't hurt, and the other 2 people were hurt pretty good. One guy lost his eye. Another guy almost lost his leg. He had a leak in his femoral artery, and of course he needed medical attention, and I provided it. I got in trouble for being there, mainly because the SPs hadn't cleared the building yet. So I was going into a hostile environment. Yeah, okay, but I did save the guy's leg, but I still got in trouble. As stupid as that sounds. When we came back to the States, we landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. That's where I processed out of the service. But my wife stayed in, of course, because, well, she could. We raised the kids in Nebraska with a year in California. We were at Riverside. She was at March Air Force Base. So we were out in that part of the world. But primarily we were in Nebraska, which is a nice place to raise your kids. It's a great place to raise your kids. How about Arizona? Is this a good place to raise kids? How about New Mexico? New Mexico's 49th, Arizona's 48th, as far as best places to raise your children. New Mexico's dangerous. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on over there.
You know, the basic neighborhood where you move it and stuff.
Yeah. My daughter is raising her son in Iowa. Iowa's number 4, which is not a bad place to raise kids. Lots of stuff for kids to do. Everybody takes care of kids over there. We were stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Tinker's right outside of Oklahoma City. It's in Midwest City. Across the street is Choctaw, Oklahoma. That's where we lived. We lived in Choctaw, Oklahoma. What else about Oklahoma? I worked in Chandler. Chandler was right next to the Sac and Fox tribal lands. That's right next to the tribal lands. Sac and Fox. Do you guys know anything about the Sac and Fox? Nothing? Blackhawks War? No, okay. Station Misawa Air Base, Japan, Columbus, Mississippi, Northridge, California. That was fun. She was at the Rand Corporation. Okay. Oxon Hills, Maryland. Black community right outside of Washington, D.C. Wichita Falls, Texas. We were there for 24 years. She retired, my wife retired after 24 years. I landed a job at Fort Belknap in, it's a reservation up in Harlan, Montana. And I was the head of the Psychology and Human Service Department for 10 years. Actually, I was the only one. I was the only one there. I was the whole department. I called myself the head. Oh, then you can go there, that's fine. And that's what it looked like at Fort Belknap. That's what other Indians look like. You mean there are other Indians in the world? Why is that like that? I wonder why that's like that.
Switch it.
Can I switch it?
Yeah.
Well, come here and help do that. Oh, your clicker's not working.
It's not.
What's
Did
not
you turn
working?
it on?
Oh, is there an on and
There's an
off?
on and off switch.
I didn't know.
There's supposed to be.
So it's on and on,
Say on and on?
There you go. There you go. There you go.
Okay, great.
Now you're good.
That's what other Indians look like.
So,
That's what Northern Plains Indians look like.
I have a question.
What?
I know I'm interrupting you.
That's okay.
Did you happen to see my card? In your
Card?
My faculty card?
No.
No. Oh, I did.
You had it on a lanyard.
I did, and somehow
Now
it
you
flew
can't
off.
find it.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah, I'll keep an eye open.
all right, we'll see it.
Yeah. Marius has my card.
That's what I heard, yeah.
Yeah, if you need to copy anything.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. So that's what Indians look like other places. Really? Come on. Yeah, that's what they look like. Not all those people are Indians, of course. And they're not all from the same tribe. I'll show you all the white people. This guy's white, this guy's white. That's me. She's white, she's white. Who else is white? She's white. She's white. This lady's white. This guy's from Puerto Rico. He's Puerto Rican. Everybody else is native of one ilk or another. There's two tribes on the reservation. Up in Montana, that's what they do. They put more than one tribe on the reservation at a time, especially if they were warring tribes. They were hoping they would kill each other off. But obviously it didn't work. You can see all the happy Indians up there. But there's a reservation really close to Fort Belknap. It's the Rocky Boy Reservation. They're Chippewa Cree. These guys are Assiniboine and Gros Ventre. There's my buddy John R. If you go to my office, I got a bunch of pictures of John R. He was a powwow dancer. We used to run together. He used to run my ass into the ground. He was so good. He was 13 years older than I was. He used to beat the crap out of me. Anyway. All right. This lady hated me. You can see from her face. She hated me. And the funny thing was, that's not that funny, I guess. If I spoke in a meeting, then she'd get up and leave. And yeah, she was that bad. Oh, see if this thing works. See, it's still not working. Oh, there you go. I don't know. Probably turned it off or something. Yeah. Anyway, that's the people of Fort Belknap. Then I went to Ashford University in Clinton, Iowa. I was there for 5 years. It was a great place to work. Organization was horrible though. And now I'm here, of course. And that's me. That's the me of me. And that's the end of that. Okay. So let's talk about how to pass this class. There's two things that you need to do. One of them is so much going on out there. It's crazy stuff. Yeah, let's talk about how to pass this class. Psychology is research, and one of the things that you need to do is, why would she be here? Okay, well, let's not worry about that. Library paper, 5-page library paper. There's always a library paper in my classes. There's a quiz for each chapter. It's worth 20 points. article critiques. I'm going to show you how to do an article critique next time. So quizzes, 5-page paper, and article critiques. What normally happens is people decide that they're going to put off doing the article critiques until the last minute. The article critique, you have to read a research article and you have to write it up. There are certain, and you can do this by answering certain questions. And the questions are on one of the pages. Title of the article, brief summary of the article, what was the hypothesis or research question, what type of study was it? Was it a quantitative, qualitative study? If you've had research methods, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't had research methods, then this is a good way to learn how to read these things. Describe how the study was conducted, what sample was it? Sometimes you'll have a sample, they'll say, white people don't like mutton. They'll say something like that. And then the number of people in the experiment were 35 people. Is that enough? Is that enough white people? Not only were they just 35 people, but there were 35 people from Massachusetts. Are those 35 people representative of all the white people in the United States? The ones in Massachusetts? This is a problem that we have. This is a problem that we have. We do all this research and then we make these broad claims, and the reality is we can't do that. Are all people the same? Both of you guys are in my counseling class, and we're going to be talking about this next time. But so you need to tell me what the sample was. Sample is very, very important. Are there enough people in the sample? Are they saying that this sample is representative? Most research is done on college students. Describe the target population, the sample. How were they selected? A lot of times they were forced to do the research by. They were forced to do it by a college professor. So do you think there is any evidence of bias? And a lot of times we see that in research. And then of course you need then you need to tell me what the findings were. There's some really interesting things out there. I don't know what you guys are the two of you are interested in, but there's some really fascinating stuff out there. Anyway, I think I already sent you an email that said that I accept late work. Now, those of you who are obsessive compulsive or anal retentive or were in the military, you'd like to get your stuff done on time, but I don't have any on time, so you can get it done whenever. The problem is that because there's only 2 of us, and one of us can only teach 3 classes. That's Jeremiah that just came in. He can only teach 3 classes this semester. I'm teaching all the other classes, so I have twice as many students.
Yeah, you got a full plate.
Yeah, and it's overflowing, and I'm licking the food off the table, unfortunately. And some of it's spilling on the floor, and when you're hungry, anyway, I've got lots and lots of students. I have twice as many students as any other instructor at the institution, so because of that, if you could, get your stuff done on time, that would be great. Okay. And next time I'll bring in an article and I'll show you how to do an article critique.
Okay.
These windows are driving me crazy. Okay, so let's take a look at chapter 1. We'll get started. I have an interesting perspective. A lot of psychologists are just psychologists, but I've worked at a lot of different jobs. I was a lab tech in the military. And because I was a lab tech, I learned a lot of medicine. Crap. Sorry. Come on.
Things doing okay, sir?
Well, I figured it out. Actually, what's his name? Showed me how to do it. Jeremiah. Okay.
You'll be able to project everything on there.
Yeah, it was working before.
Everything should be on.
Yeah, I've got one of these things. I don't suppose you have an extra one of those.
I do not know.
Okay. I stole this from someplace else. That's not what it is. Yeah, so I guess we're ready to go.
Okay, just gonna check the function. Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
I tested everything out for you, so
Right.
are you projecting?
I
You
don't
do
know.
that command where you tell it to project them to,
Is there a command?
I'm not sure about the command.
Or go ahead and fix it. Make it work.
Let me just make sure the TV online should be able to
Yeah, it should. Oh, there it goes.
Oh, lost it.
Didn't get my keyboard work. Now, it was working before, kinda.
Okay.
And then Jeremiah came in and he said, hey, I was showing them the screen that I had. This is fun.
Good, that part's not done yet.
There it comes.
Oh. Yep. Yeah. We haven't done that part yet, so right now it's just that podium takes care of just that side, the other podium takes care of the other side. We haven't installed. Yep.
Huh.
You just need to project the image onto here, however you make that happen with the Mac. I'm not familiar with Macs at all.
That's all we've got in the site department, it's Max. And it was working before. Did you touch something and make it not work? So you didn't break?
No.
Okay.
If it's within here, Matt, you gotta tell your machine to project.
But it was working before, like I said.
So it was showing up on there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And this is what it was showing.
Reconnected somewhere.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Yeah.
And on my laptop, I have to tell it to project duplicate. Swap displays.
So, again, this, it's up, okay. Good, thank you, I guess. I'm not sure what you did.
Nothing really.
Can you talk to it again? All right, let's see if I can make this thing. Okay, so we're taking biological psych, you're taking biological psychology, I'm teaching biological psychology. What is it all about? Well, what it's all about is it's trying to integrate anatomy, biology, physiology with psychology. That's what it's trying to do. We look at a lot of different things. We look at the underlying physiology behind thinking, behind all these functionings. We try to determine how it developed. We try to look at different structures of humans in the past to see how this has evolved. And we try to determine the function of all of these structures. Why is this important? Why should we care about any of this crap? We're trying to fix somebody who's depressed or has PTSD or potentially is schizophrenic. And we can give them different medications and it changes the way they act. This is great. He's gonna wet the floor for all the kids coming through. This is wonderful. Okay. What time is it? 9:38. Okay. So why in the world would we study any of this stuff? Well, the reason is because we're trying to come up with medications that'll fix people. And if we have medications, we have to know why those medications are working. We have to know why those medications are killing people. We come up with medications all the time that work. And sometimes they help, and sometimes they help for a while, and then they stop helping. As I said before, I used to be a laboratory technician. I still am to some extent, but I'm not working in the field anymore. So for 12 years while I was in the service, I was a laboratory technician, and they taught me a lot of different things. The school for a laboratory technician is longer than the school for pilots. Our training was longer than the training for pilots. Pilots trained for 13 months to be able to fly an airplane, and we trained for 15 months to be lab techs. And there's a reason for that. The reason is because they learned one thing. They learned how to fly. They may have learned on different airframes, but we learned a lot of different things. We learned chemistry. We learned hematology. We learned parasitology. We learned oncology, we learned urinalysis, we learned serology, we learned a lot of different things. And we had to learn everything because in a medical situation, when somebody comes in and they're sick and we don't know why, we have to look at a lot of different things. And the individual that does that is usually the laboratory technician. We get a blood sample, we get a urine sample, we get a stomach contents sample, and we have to determine what's going on with that select individual. So we need to know all these different things. Sometimes somebody will come in with a pain in their stomach, and they draw blood for us, and we would have to decide, we would have to find out what was wrong with that individual. The doctor, of course, would diagnose, oh, this looked like an appendicitis to me. And we would have to run the test to find out what was actually wrong with that individual. Appendicitis looks like, has a certain picture when you see somebody with an appendicitis. If you see somebody with the flu, somebody comes in with the flu, do they really have the flu? The flu looks like a lot of different things. Hepatitis looks like the flu. Leukemia looks like the flu. Mononucleosis looks like the flu. All of these things look the same. Somebody's got a cold and they come in and they're really tired. So we would have to determine what their problem was. So that's one of the reasons why our school was longer than the pilot school. And that's one of the reasons why I went to Wichita Falls. I was there for 7 months, and then the rest of my training was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's why I was at Wright-Patterson. I was at Wright-Patterson when the POWs came back from Vietnam. Yeah, that was nasty. And we had to look at all these guys, and we had to decide whether they could leave. Now, some of these guys had been tortured and had been in prison for years. For 5 or 6 years. John McCain had been a POW for 5 years, and he had been tortured, and he was one of the guys we looked at. And so we had to determine if we could release them to the general public. And some of them, most of them we did, but most of them were able to go back, and some of them were too messed up. Just the way it works. Sometimes you run into this kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons why we need to look at people. There's different reasons why things happen, and that's what we need to determine. The difference between the two of you. If I gave both of you the same medication, would you react the same? Let's say you're both depressed, and so I'm going to throw some Prozac at you. Would you both react the same? Well, now we know that Prozac only works for about 75% of the population. That means 25% don't react to it. So are you one of the 25% or are you one of the 75%? Well, I hope you're one of the 75% that it works for. But it also does some really strange things to you. It lowers your inhibitions. People who take Prozac, they're depressed. So some of them commit suicide. Now wait a minute, why in the world would we give somebody a medication that allows you to commit suicide? Because it lowers your inhibitions. You don't have any inhibitions anymore. Before, you would be thinking, I've got too much to do, I've got a family to take care of, I can't do it, I can't hurt myself. But of course, when you take the Prozac, it makes you forget about all those things. You become single-minded. You can only think of one thing at a time. You can't juggle things like you did before. That's what the medication does to you. So you have to be careful as to what's happening. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we're studying all this stuff. It's important. The central premise of biological psychology is that the bodily processes, particularly those of the nervous system, are the basis of all of our behavior. We have been in different circumstances. You've traveled. You've been everywhere. We've traveled. We've been to a lot of different places. How in the world why did we behave the way that we did when we were in the situations that we were in?
Don't really have a choice.
Well, you do have a choice. Why do you stand up and shoot your weapon when you're in a firefight? Why don't you just hunker down? You could do that if you wanted. Some people did, fight or flight, exactly. Some people just hunkered down. They didn't want to raise their heads. They were afraid they'd get shot in the head. And they didn't get back up. They didn't get up. They stayed down until the firefight was over with, and then they got up. Of course, nobody wants to be with that guy. Nobody wants to serve with him because he won't help. He's not part of the team. But, so what is the basis of all of our behavior? Why did he react that way? And will he react that way the next time? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. Biological psychology is multidisciplinary in scope and draws on knowledge produced in diverse scientific fields in an effort to produce integrated descriptions of the generation of behavior. One of the problems that we have in medicine, one of the problems we have in psychology is that people study one thing. You study psychology, and that's all you understand. But these aren't the innovative thinkers. Biological psychology is not just psychology, it's also biology. It's a lot of different things. I'm going to show you a picture of just all the things that this is all about. So why do I teach biological psychology? Well, I teach biological psychology because I was in medicine before, and I understand how things work. And I understand how things work because I dealt with people in emergency rooms. I dealt with people in traumatic situations. And because of that, I understood how things work. I understand that people go into shock. And when they go into shock, they stop sending blood to their brain. And if you're not careful, they'll die. Some people, when they relax, okay, let's see. You have the ability to stop bleeding if you want to. You can do that. You can stop yourself from bleeding. Okay. If you go into shock, you don't have any control over it anymore. And that's when people bleed out and die. But if you're aware of what's going on, you can slow down your bleeding. You can slow down you relax so that you can slow down your heart rate. What's my heart rate right now? What is my heart rate? Ooh, it's high. So biological psychology is multidisciplinary. Psychologists, of course, have to teach the class. Biologists are part of it. Physiologists, they are the individuals that recognize the structures that we're dealing with. Engineers can look at a situation and tell what's going on. Neurologists, of course, are the ones that look at the different neuronal structures. What was I going to talk about? Oh, I was going to talk about, there's a new theory out there. It's called the biome theory. The biome theory states that an individual is made of bacteria. You have as many bacteria in your body as you have cells in your body. As a matter of fact, you may have more bacteria than you have cells. So depending on the food that you eat, depending on the environment that you live in, your bacteria will be different. So if you live here on the reservation, you've always lived here on the reservation, the bacteria in your biome, the bacteria in your body, are one type of bacteria. You live in the desert. That's not the same as living in the cornfields of Iowa. So when you create these bacteria in your body, they can change the way that you think because they support select behavior. So bacteria potentially, if you are depressed, we can change your biome and we can take care of your depression. How exciting is that? Now this has nothing at all to do with medication. This has to do with bacteria. Bacteria in your stomach, bacteria especially in your digestive tract. So if we can change the bacteria in your digestive tract, we can take care of your depression. So if you've ever lived in a specific place, everybody seems grouchy. So what the hell's going on? Does it have to do with their bacteria, or does it have to do with the fact that it's cloudy all the time in that area?
Like Seattle?
Like Seattle, exactly. But there's not, the suicide rate in Seattle is not that much higher than any place else. Southern California has a lot of suicides. People jump off the bridges in Southern California. What do they have to be upset about? Well, maybe it's the crappy food that they eat. Except for In-N-Out Burger, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. That's the best food in the world. But maybe it has to do with the food that they eat. Maybe if you get your food from South America, from Central America, fresh vegetables or whatever, maybe it's changing the bacteria in your gut. So when you go to a new place, sometimes, if you go down to Mexico and you eat the food, sometimes people from the United States get diarrhea, they get dysentery.
That's what happens with going to deployment. You regulate what you eat,
Exactly.
and then you come back, and you go in and out. Goes right through.
Is that right? The food's too rich. You're used to eating MREs, meals ready to eat. Okay. In my time, it was K rations and C rations. And some of our stuff was from the Korean War, I swear. This is back in the 70s.
Well, that stuff has like,
It's
20 years.
20 years in the
Something.
can. So if you eat the wrong stuff, you get sick. If you eat too much rich food, you get sick. Now, why in the world would that be? Well, it's because it's different food. If you go to Korea, and people will do this, they'll eat on the economy. Oh, I want to eat Korean food, I want to eat Korean food. Well, the Koreans, no, they eat a lot of fish.
And kimchi.
Well, I don't know, kimchi will kill anything. It's got so much garlic in it. I know.
The smell.
Oh, have you been to Korea?
No, but
Well, you've been around Korean restaurants.
yeah.
There's a smell for you. Anyway, if you go to Korea, if people eat on the economy, it makes them sick. They can't handle it. It's the same way in Mexico, of course. It's very similar to the situation in Mexico. But when you were deployed, you probably ate all MREs, or they cooked for you, and all that food, none of that food was local. All that food came from the States. Has to come from the States.
We'd have food with like some of the village elders, and they actually eat pretty healthy.
They do eat healthy, but it's got bacteria in it that you're not
Yeah.
used to. So,
That's true.
and that can be a potential problem. So when people first deploy, if they eat food that's not military food, a lot of times they get sick because they're not used to it. There's bacteria in there that you're just not used to. Normally, the food that you eat, we're eating bacteria all the time. If you eat from the Warrior Cafe or whatever, Warrior Coffee. If you have a scone over here, it's got the bacteria from this area. So you're okay. You're probably okay because you eat it all the time. But when you first go to a new place, a lot of times you get sick, or you get the runs. Call it what we used to call it in the military. But I had it the whole time I was overseas. So biological psychology is fed by a lot of different disciplines, as you can see. Neuroanatomy, neuroimaging, anatomy, developmental biology, molecular biology, endocrinology, immunology, biochemistry, physiology, neurology, psychiatry, computer science, cognitive science, anthropology, evolutionary biology. We're trying to figure out why things work the way things work. And we have to look at a lot of different things. Now, one of the problems, and I said this before, one of the problems we have right now in our education is that we force you to focus on one thing. You're going to be a psychologist, and that's all you're going to be, unless you were something else before, and that's what happened with me. My bachelor's degree is in English, which means that I can correct your papers grammatically. And yeah, I know this is weird. Now, the weird thing is, all the psychologists used to have their students write papers, but they couldn't correct them because they had never studied English. Well, I had, so I could correct everybody's paper. I could correct it grammatically. Now, the weird thing is I can't spell, but if you misspell a word, I can correct your spelling, but I can't correct my own spelling. As weird as that is. So my first degree is in biology, or is in, English. My second degree is in medical laboratory technology. So I have a degree in medicine. It's an associate's degree, don't get too excited. My third degree is in psychology. So I have a master's degree in psychology. I have a fourth degree, which is in political science, international relations. And of course, I was overseas at the time, and we were about to be attacked by the Soviets. So there was a lot going on when I was studying international relations. And my PhD is in psychology. General psychology. I'm not a cognitive psychologist. I'm not a Rogerian. I was trained to be a Rogerian, but I am a general psychologist, which is a little weird. Because Sarah was a cognitive psychologist, and she only had degrees in psychology. I got degrees in a lot of different areas. So I understand all of this. I understand medicine, and because I understand medicine, because I understand anatomy and physiology, I've taught anatomy and physiology. My knowledge base is a little bit different than most psychologists, and that's why I get to teach this class. Now, I don't know why I put her picture up there. That's what my second wife looked like. This is an actress, but she's not. I wasn't married to this lady. I was married to a lady who looked just like her. And I can't remember why I put this in here. My second wife. I showed you a picture of my current wife. Okay. I don't know. Very attractive woman. Okay, so what are we talking about? Observation at all possible levels. This requires analysis at many different levels, from molecular to macro activity to interaction with the environment. We're going to talk about, well, you're both in the counseling class, and we'll be talking about this in the next class. And what you're primarily going to be dealing with is interactions with the environment. Something's happening at home. That's why they come in. So you're just looking at the macro level. But the reality is there's a lot of stuff going on with this individual. Are they depressed because of something that's happening within them? Are males and females the same? Can we treat males and females the same? What's the difference between males and females besides males are bald and females have hair? Sorry. Men grow beards, women rarely do. Is there any other thing that would make it different for a female and a male?
Maybe maybe emotions, how they would handle it.
Okay.
More sensitive, maybe.
Women are more sensitive than men.
Maybe, it depends.
I don't know, have you ever been around a really tough lady? Who
Yeah.
doesn't seem to, yeah, exactly. So,
I knew this girl could carry a freaking Mountain Dews.
yeah, exactly.
I spit tobacco.
Well, it couldn't be tobacco, it's gotta be something else. Are there other differences between males and females that'll change the way you react to medication?
Pregnancy,
Pregnancy?
that,
Yeah, well, hormones, sure. Female hormones go up and down on an almost continual basis. That's what the menstrual cycle is all about. Males don't have a menstrual cycle. Not really. Their testosterone does go up and down, but not very much. But female hormones, they really change things. So females will react differently to things, potentially, than males will. There are times during the month when a female is very sensitive to things. Strangely enough, it's just before she ovulates. Not during her period. She's fairly dulled during her period. Her sense of smell is better. Her sense of taste changes just before she ovulates. So what's ovulation all about? Reproduction. Has to do with reproduction. It's necessary for the species to continue. There is an animal out there called the wolverine. Of course, you guys have never come in contact with a wolverine, but I have. Wolverines are the meanest things in the whole, they'll kill anything. And you just do not want to confront a wolverine. They're big. They're about half the size of a black bear. Badgers, if you've ever come in contact with a badger, you cannot kill a badger. You'll have to blow its head off. It's the only way you can kill it. Because if you try to beat it to death, it won't happen. Why am I talking about that? Oh, wolverines. In order for wolverines to reproduce, wolverines are so mean that they can't live with another wolverine. So how in the world do they ever reproduce? Well, when the female ovulates, she will allow a male into her territory. This is very important for the continuation of the species. Humans are the same way. In order for us to continue as a species, we have to reproduce. And even though Wilson doesn't like us talking about reproduction, we have to. I'm sorry, it's just the way it works, okay? So there is a difference. There is a difference between males and females. There's a difference. Culture will teach you how to react to things. You haven't been in. But you were in the Arab world. Were you in Iraq or Afghanistan?
both.
Both.
Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. It's about all the stands.
You've been in with all the stands. Okay. Difference between Iraqis and people in Afghanistan?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the environment
Yeah.
was definitely.
But the people, did they act the same? If you were wandering around Iraq, did they act exactly the same as the people in Afghanistan?
No.
No. Or Tajikistan. Tajikistan they look more Asian than.
Yeah, they got the like the Russian type look mixed in with Asian. Like I saw a little kid, redhead.
Yeah.
I was like, what the heck?
There's a whole pocket of redheads that live in that area. It's the most bizarre thing in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was even some in Afghanistan too.
Yeah, but they're from up north. But there are pockets of redheads. Now, redheads are really hard to make. It's really hard to make somebody with red hair. You have to have that gene. You have to have two of those genes, and they have to reproduce. If somebody with black hair reproduces with somebody with red hair, all their children will have black hair. None of them will have red hair, but they'll all have the red-headed gene. So if that black-headed child has a baby with a red-headed person, or somebody who has the red-headed gene, potentially they will have a red-headed child. I have a niece who has red hair. My brother has brown hair and his wife has brown hair. So was she messing around with the postman or something? No, it's each of them had redheaded genes. I have redheaded genes. If I grow a mustache, it comes out red. Well, it used to. Now it comes out white. But in the old days, it would come out red. So I looked really weird. I had brown hair and a red mustache, which looks goofy. We'll pretend it looks goofy. 5 viewpoints of biology and behavior. Describing the behavior. First thing you need to do is you need to recognize what that behavior is. Studying the evolution of the behavior. How has it changed over time? A good example of this has to do with reproduction. Has it changed over time? Arranged marriages, married for love. So how have things changed over time? If you think about your parents, if you think about your grandparents, you think about your great-grandparents, how did they ever get together? Things have changed. Everything has changed. Observing the development of the behavior and its biological characteristics over the lifespan. How has this changed for you? Geez, I keep coming back to sex. Let's get off sex and start thinking about something else. Wait a minute. Eating, okay. When you were a baby, you ate whatever you ate, but you didn't eat the same food that you're eating now. Maybe when you were a teenager, you could eat anything. You didn't have to worry about indigestion at all. As you get older, of course, both of you are relatively young, as you get older, your ability to process that spicy food declines. Then as you get older, now all of a sudden you can't tolerate that food anymore. It makes you sick, gives you indigestion. My wife hates me, and I can tell you why she hates me. Once upon a time, I could eat anything. And she could cook with garlic. And now I can't tolerate garlic. And it pisses her off, because she likes garlic. She's 2 years younger than I am. And she doesn't have these problems. She's also from a different place. I'm from Indiana. And as you saw from my DNA studies, I'm almost all English. Well, the English eat really bland food. So I grew up eating relatively bland food. My mother didn't use any spices. The only spices she recognized were salt, pepper, and chili powder in the chili. And I'll tell you, her chili was not very good. She made it out of hamburger, onions, kidney beans, and what else? And chili powder. There you go. But it wasn't very good. I make really good chili. As a matter of fact, I have 4 jars of chili in my refrigerator right now. But I use spicier food, but I can't make it too spicy because it'll just burn a hole right through me. Okay. My wife's from Georgia. And in Georgia, they eat Southern food. So they eat a lot of fried foods. But they also put spices in their foods that I can't tolerate. I just can't do it. As weird as that is. Number 4, studying the biological mechanisms of the behavior. What is changing? Is it my stomach? Acid doesn't work as well as it used to. I have to take Prilosec every day in order to not get sick. You know, if it wasn't for Prilosec, I wouldn't be functional. I couldn't eat anything. Studying applications of biological psychology, for example, dysfunctions, lack of function. Dysfunctions, why are you depressed? Why are you anxious about things? That's a dysfunction. Normal function is, you handle everything, you're relatively resilient. Some people are more sensitive to things than others. And I will tell you a story in the next class about somebody who couldn't handle it. Working in the emergency room. I've had individuals who trained to be emergency room doctors. First time they got into a traumatic situation, they folded, couldn't handle it. The nurses had to take over for them, or the lab tech had to take over for them.
Who experienced that?
They just couldn't handle the trauma, too much pressure. And this guy had gone through training, but his training didn't include real trauma. When the first one came in, he folded up like a house of cards. Could not handle it. Some people can handle things and other people can't, and we need to recognize that. You see it in combat.
Yeah, there's a guy we're coming down to MRAP, and I'm okay, when this comes down,
Right.
we will be fired upon. He peed his pants and he just freaking froze up. So you know the old IBAs got the handle, I pulled him back, I'm like under 50. I'm like, you can do that, right? Yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
He just froze up.
Froze
Peed
up.
himself. I'm like, as soon as this score goes down, we're gonna be fired upon. So, yeah. It all depends. I mean, infantry school is different, but it's.
Well, everybody could have died because he couldn't function.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened with the doctor. That trauma could have died because he couldn't handle it. The nurses took care of it, and they got another doctor in there. And we saved the guy's life. Everything was fine. It was a bleeder, and some people can't handle blood. As weird as that sounds, you're a doctor and you can't handle blood. But most medical situations the bleeding is controlled, and that's what he was used to. He wasn't used to being the person that stopped the bleeding. He was used to being the person that came in after the bleeding was already under control. And that's what he couldn't handle. And of course, as a lab tech, I get to swim in blood all the time, as much fun as that sounds. Before a scientist can do any research on biological function, they must decide and describe the function that they will research. We need to look at it from the perspective that we're dealing with. We need to look at it from the point of view of what we're dealing with. Traumatic situation, for example, in the emergency room. Is that what we're talking about? If you come across somebody has just been in an automobile accident, what do? Back in the 1950s, my mother was a nurse. My mother was a registered nurse. Back in the 1950s, they were driving down the road and they came upon a crash. And my mother went over and this guy had his hand on his neck like this. And as soon as he took his hand away, he had a puncture in his jugular vein. Okay. So what do you do for somebody with a puncture in the jugular vein?
Blood pressure.
Well, if you apply pressure, the guy will pass out and potentially you'll kill him. Whoops. Might send a blood clot to his brain. So we gotta
to make so he can breathe, right? Make a hole.
Well, you've got to connect the two parts, where the cut is. And he had this gash across. I mean, it looked like somebody had taken a knife and slid him across the throat. But they hadn't, of course. He'd just been in an accident. So my mother was there, and usually these people just bleed out and they die. Okay, because there's nothing anybody can do. But my mother there's something wrong with my mother. She thinks she can save everybody. She was a registered nurse. She worked in the emergency room. So what she did, she knew that they had tubes that they put in both ends of the jugular vein. You can do that. If you can find something that works, like a pen, if you open it up, you've got two openings. One's here and one's there. It's not a lot of blood going through, but it's an adequate amount to keep the guy alive. And that's what she did. She took my dad's ballpoint pen and she stuck one end into the artery in his neck and the other one going into his brain. And she was able, she put she put a wrap around it to keep it in place, and they got him to the emergency room, and they took him to surgery, and they were able to sew it back together. Saved his life. Quick thinking. Most people just watch him bleed out. Most people have never seen that before, but of course she was able to handle it. Why am I talking about this? We're talking about situations that you have to research. Does that work every time? No. This guy had passed out, and because he had passed out, his blood pressure dropped. his heart rate went down. And that's probably saved his life as much as my mother putting the thing in. But it allowed her to do that. Normally what happens if you've got a pumping artery, the pressure is so great that you can't get anything in there. And sometimes it recedes. That's what happens with the femoral artery. It recedes, it goes back into the body. It's trying to protect itself. And it does that by going back into the body. But of course, he had passed out already, so she was able to do that. Why am I talking about this? By comparing species, scientists can speculate how behavior and neural structures have changed as species have evolved. There are places in the United States where you can't teach evolution. But the reality is, animals have come from the same place. And so if we look at humans, if we look at a human brain, we look at, this is a monkey brain. We can see that there are similarities. There's similarities between all the mammals. All the primates have very similar brain structures. So the trick is, can we do experiments, say we're talking about, well, there's a problem, we have a problem right now with marijuana. And the reason we have a problem is because we haven't done very much research and we really don't know what that stuff does. We know that the CBD oil is medicinal. What's the long-term effect of smoking marijuana? Well, we can look at Willie Nelson. He's been smoking marijuana for what, 50, 60 years. Is he representative of all the humans in the United States? Probably not. I was living in Chinook, Montana, which is right beside Fort Belknap. I was living in Chinook, Montana. I was talking to the barber. It was a female barber. How many is it actually?
20.
Is it 20? My battery's dead. I don't have a phone. Oh, well. It's 20, so we need to stop right now. Anyway, I'll tell you the story about marijuana next time. What happened was they had, there were 5 guys